The jury selection process continues on BBC Two shortly, and out of court someone confesses to the Goldilocks murder. Here on BBC One now, the news at 9 o'clock with Michael Buerk.
A blunder at Britain's leading forensic laboratory has cast doubt on a dozen terrorist bomb trials dating back to 1989. The Queen gives President Chirac beef, but the Germans are set to stop any easing of the ban on British meat. And it's a fair fight. The London taxi is out to conquer Paris. Good evening. The Home Secretary has ordered an inquiry into as many as a dozen terrorist bombing convictions after a key piece of equipment used in testing for traces of the explosive Semtex was found to be contaminated. Traces of explosive were found by accident in a centrifuge at the Government Forensic Laboratory at Sevenoaks in Kent. It's the only one of its kind in the country and has been used for most of the main terrorist trials on this side of the Irish Sea since 1989.
This is the establishment where the alarm over testing was raised. The Forensic Explosives Laboratory, run by the Ministry of Defence in Kent, plays a vital role in evaluating evidence in terrorist cases. The machine which may have contaminated samples is a centrifuge. A scientist discovered that a rubber bung at the bottom of a test tube had become impregnated with a small quantity of the explosive RDX. At the Home Office, it was admitted that regular quality assurance tests had failed to pick up the problem.
We are commissioning an independent inquiry to look at it as thoroughly and as comprehensively as possible to see if it just might have been the cause of evidence having been given at a trial which wasn't entirely reliable.
MPs discovered that an inquiry had been ordered when a parliamentary written answer appeared this afternoon.
The Home Secretary has shown extraordinary arrogance and ineptitude in refusing to go to the House of Commons and explain this very serious situation. Slipping out this information in an obscure written answer is no way for a Home Secretary to behave.
The Home Office has failed this country and failed the criminal justice system in not securing a good and adequate system of quality control in the Forensic Science Service, and I think it's very, very serious.
The use of a high explosive such as Semtex has been a key feature of the IRA's mainland bombing campaign. The evidence from blasts such as at Warrington has been tested at the Kent laboratory. And Vincent Wood was convicted as an IRA terrorist at the Old Bailey after a large quantity of Semtex was found in his possession. Defence lawyers say a number of prominent trials will have to be looked at again.
In any case, if the defence had known that there was the potential of the very source of the investigation producing false results, the whole trial could have had a different outcome.
I think that some cases will go to the Court of Appeal where the lawyers decide that the evidence which was used by the prosecution relied almost exclusively on the forensic tests that were carried out. There will, of course, be other cases where there was extra evidence, which means that they won't necessarily go to the Court of Appeal on this point.
The Crown Prosecution Service is now looking at those cases which might be affected. There have been more than 30 convictions under the Explosive Substances Act since 1989. The effect of today's revelation could be devastating. The Home Secretary may at some stage have to refer a number of high-profile terrorist cases to the Court of Appeal. And if those convictions are quashed, faith in British justice will have taken another crushing blow. John Silverman, BBC News at the Home Office.
Sinn Féin tonight told all Republican prisoners convicted on explosives charges to challenge their sentence. The Home Office has appointed one of the country's leading forensic scientists to determine how serious the errors were. As our technology correspondent Christine McGurty reports, some scientists think the contamination should have been discovered much sooner.
Professor Brian Caddy of Strathclyde University is widely recognised as the leading expert in forensic science. His aim will be to find out how many samples could have been affected by contamination and how important the forensic evidence was in each case involving Semtex explosive. In cases such as the recent bus bombing in the Strand, the wrecked vehicle was taken to the explosives laboratory, where it was examined in minute detail to determine which explosives were used. Semtex leaves tiny traces behind on clothes and fingernails. Police take samples from suspects using cotton wool swabs, and these can prove to be the crucial difference between conviction and acquittal. In the centrifuge test, a cotton swab is placed in a test tube. It's then spun around at high speed to separate liquid from solid. Large particles of dirt and dust are forced to the bottom of the test tube, leaving a liquid sample that would contain any traces of explosive. This is a private forensic laboratory near Newbury, where they have a centrifuge similar to the one used by the explosives laboratory. The independent forensic expert there says it provides a crude but effective test that shouldn't go wrong, providing careful procedures are followed to prevent contamination.
I think we can only assume that the centrifuge was being used in some other part of the MOD for actual explosive materials, and that an accident occurred whilst the machine was being used for that purpose, possibly a spillage inside the machine itself.
In the past, high-profile cases such as the Birmingham 6 have fallen following doubts over forensic methods. Leading lawyers say they've been arguing for years that such mistakes should not be allowed to happen.
There have been substantial recommendations for tightening quality control, none of which have been put into effect. And contamination and the risk of contamination is something that's been on the tip of everybody's tongues. Everybody's known about that risk, and it should have been countered and revealed at an earlier stage.
When the investigations into crimes like the recent attempted bombing of Hammersmith Bridge in London can rely so crucially on forensic evidence, and even a simple centrifuge test can be put in doubt, question marks must now hang over the future of forensic evidence in court. Christine McGurty, BBC News.
Germany is likely to lead moves to block a partial lifting of the ban on British beef exports. In Brussels, the German health minister said his country would vote against any relaxation of the ban when it's discussed tomorrow by veterinary experts. Last week, the European Commission said it thought exports of British beef products such as tallow and gelatin should be resumed.
Tonight, at the heart of Brussels' diplomatic quarter, all the signals point to defeat for any proposal to ease the beef ban. The Health Secretary, Stephen Dorrell, and his European counterparts did agree today more scientific research into BSE is needed, but they agreed on little else. Afterwards, the German minister was blunt. Britain hadn't done enough to justify any relaxation of the ban. Controls must be seen to work better first.
I can clearly say we can't have any softening of the ban now, especially for the sake of consumers.
Others were less direct, but Austria, Spain and Portugal take the same view, and together they hold enough votes to block any easing of the ban. It's the European Commission which is recommending that gelatin and other beef byproducts produced in Britain should be allowed back onto world markets, provided high-temperature treatments are used. But it looks as if this first modest breach of the total ban won't be approved by government vets. Any vote tomorrow will still be very finely balanced, and the European Commission could even withdraw its proposal to ease the beef ban to prevent it being crushed by the member states. If Britain is frustrated again, the Foreign Secretary signalled here yesterday his feeling that veiled threats of British retaliation would have to be followed through. Sabre-rattling could turn to skirmishes of active non-cooperation with the European Union, and then the beef crisis would become outright political confrontation. James Robbins, BBC News, Brussels.
The French President Jacques Chirac has begun a 4-day state visit to Britain. He's due to have talks with the Prime Minister on a number of issues, with the ban on beef exports high on the agenda. Tonight, a state banquet is being held in his honour.
The state banquet at Buckingham Palace offered President Chirac a respite from British beef. He was fed it for lunch. It'll be top of the political menu tomorrow, but tonight was a chance to savour British lamb and the pageantry with which Britain hopes to subvert him away from an over-integrated Europe. In his dinner toast, he plans to call on Britain to play a more constructive role in developing Europe's future. The President and his wife came by train through the Channel Tunnel, the new rail link a sign of a new relationship to supplant the symbols of a checkered history, like Waterloo Station, named for the battle, where Princess Margaret greeted a president strikingly more at ease with the English language and Anglo-Saxon attitudes than any of his predecessors. The Queen waited to receive him on Horse Guards Parade, beneath a tented pavilion that could have graced any meeting of medieval sovereigns, the formality tempered by the band's can-can music. The pomp of a state visit, arranged with breakneck speed for a president elected only a year ago, was intended as a reminder that Britain and France both have a history to be proud of and a common cause in maintaining their distance from supranational institutions. President Chirac has by all accounts built a warm personal relationship with John Major. Jacques and Jean they call each other, and while a considerable distance still separates them on Europe, they appear comfortable in dealing with it. On issues like defence, President Chirac is moving his position closer to Britain's, and he's using France's new adaptability as a lure to try and draw Britain back into European negotiations. Together, he's suggesting Britain and France can shape events their way. After a day devoted mainly to spectacle, practical politics start tomorrow. There'll be talks at Downing Street, and afterwards he'll address both Houses of Parliament. There, President Chirac is expected to insist that Britain must play a full part in developing the European Union. Brian Hanrahan, BBC News.
The Prime Minister's promised government money as speedily as practicable to improve school security. He was responding to a report commissioned after the murder of the London headmaster, Philip Lawrence. The head teachers leader said £25 million should be made available now. The report makes more than 20 recommendations. They include earmarking funds specifically for security improvements, making installation of closed-circuit television a priority, and improving control over school entrances.
As the school day ended, so too did the notion of schools as open, unfenced places. After recent events, especially Dunblane, there'll now be more gates, locks and security cameras. St Luke's Primary in Kingston, Surrey is a model for the future, with its high perimeter fence, single controlled entrance and entry phone. All visitors must sign in and wear badges while on site. The school had to pay for its extra security, even though it's a brand new building.
Before we had a building which was 100 years old, and outside toilets. It was very difficult to secure. The day we moved into this school, the children weren't here, we were vandalised, and on that day I ordered an entry phone system to be installed into the school and discussed with one of my governors the feasibility of extending our CTC television camera.
Those cameras, costing £5,000, monitor all areas. Some parents found the atmosphere less welcoming, but accept the need for security. The Government Committee says security must be a consideration when designing new school buildings or making alterations. In particular, in the light of Dunblane, they say priority must be given to controlling access to sites. The report also recommends personal safety training for teachers and a legal duty for governors to report annually to parents on security. Making it an offence to carry knives in schools and extending police search powers there are recommendations the government has already acted on. But the committee says substantial new money is needed for the other measures. This Sheffield school agrees. It did review security and requested government cash for surveillance cameras. It was turned down because it couldn't raise matching funds.
We need the money now. Schools and the children need that reassurance now. There have been too many incidents in schools up and down the country. There should be no delay. The funding should be pumped right through the system as a matter of urgency.
A view echoed at Westminster.
Can I ask the Prime Minister, therefore, whether, as well as accepting the recommendations of the group, they will in fact be fully funded and, if necessary, funded from within the current financial year?
We have made it clear that there will be a government funding programme over whatever period is necessary in order to follow the recommendations through.
The Security Committee wants to go on to look at the issues of discipline and behaviour after the recent rows over pupil expulsions. Mike Baker, BBC News.
Surgeons in Norwich have successfully removed a bullet from behind the eye of Tenny Cole, the 5-year-old orphan brought to Britain from Sierra Leone. Doctors showed the bullet, which they removed during a 3-hour operation. Tenny, who was shot 16 months ago during her country's civil war, is recovering in the hospital's children's ward. The government may be sued over its advice to the public about the risk from BSE, mad cow disease. The daughter of an Oxfordshire woman who died from the human equivalent, CJD, 2 years ago, is seeking legal aid to take the Ministry of Agriculture to court. The Conservative Party has launched a pre-election advertising campaign with an admission that its economic policies have hurt. The campaign, which was launched in London, is due to spread nationwide over the next 2 weeks. The Bank of England has hinted that interest rates may have to go up because of the risk of higher inflation. Its latest report says the government is currently on course to meet its inflation target, but higher consumer spending could push inflation up.
Hints of higher interest rates are not what any manufacturer wants to hear from the Bank of England. Output is already stationary or falling, without the Chancellor jamming on the brakes as well. For HMG Paints in northern Manchester, the market has seldom been tougher, and inflation is yesterday's problem.
All of our customers are insisting that we hold prices, and the larger ones are looking for reductions phased over many years. Last year, when we were forced, after 4 years of stability, to have a small price increase, we got terrific resistance and lost some customers after a very long time.
Down the road at Sterling McGregor, another family business makes nightwear, and acute market pressure on prices has forced them to import more and more of their product from the Near and Far East. The chairman is also president of the local Chamber of Commerce.
Business is very tough. The marketplace is perhaps the worst that I've seen in 30 years of business. Costs are not able to be passed on to the customer. We're finding competition very difficult, and we really need a reduction in interest rates to give a fillip to business and to industry.
But according to the Bank of England's report today, inflation in the high street is expected to wobble over the next 2 years, just below and then just above 2.5%, which is the government's central target. The bank hopes this narrow squeak will dissuade the Chancellor from any further interest rate cuts and even prepare the ground for increases from next autumn.
If inflationary pressures started to become a serious problem again, a government pushed by the Bank of England would raise interest rates to cope with it. That, of course, would mean that unemployment would start to rise again.
Manchester is the historic home of free trade and competitive markets, the economic philosophy which has now taken over the world. Exactly 150 years ago, it launched a century of cheap food in Britain by securing the repeal of the Corn Laws, a kind of Victorian common agricultural policy. Now, to control inflation, we rely on reports from the Bank of England and political decisions. But we're still no nearer to combining stable prices with full employment. Peter Jay, BBC News, Manchester.
Scientists believe that the household painkiller aspirin could be developed as a new treatment for one of the commonest forms of cancer. In laboratory tests, the Cancer Research Campaign says that aspirin can make cancer cells from the large bowel self-destruct.
For more than 20 years, David Borden has suffered from a severe inflammation of the bowel. 4 years ago, he was diagnosed with bowel cancer, one of more than 30,000 people a year who get the disease. He was treated with surgery, radiotherapy and powerful drugs and is in remission. Now, research at Bristol University has suggested that the humble aspirin may one day play a role in treating the disease. It's already thought aspirin can help prevent bowel cancer. Now laboratory research has shown it can slow the growth of some cancer cells and cause others to self-destruct.
Our observation that aspirin can induce cell death or cell suicide in colorectal tumour cells allows us to develop new drugs which perhaps work like aspirin and can be used perhaps more effectively in the prevention of bowel cancer.
The Cancer Research Campaign believes the findings are promising but warns against too much optimism.
I think it gives us an important insight into the possible use of a non-toxic drug in everyday use in the treatment of bowel cancer. It works in the lab. The question is, will it work in the patients? And we'll have to wait and see.
For many cancer patients, the new findings will be welcome.
If it means that you have a quicker solution without all the worries and the trauma that the fear of cancer has, that would be fantastic.
Trials using aspirin with patients are now being planned. The results won't be known for 2 or 3 years. James Wilkinson, BBC News.
The Russian Foreign Ministry says it will go ahead with the expulsion of British diplomats it accuses of spying. Moscow has threatened to order up to 9 diplomats out of the country after a Russian civil servant was arrested for allegedly passing secrets to London. The Dr. Jack Kevorkian, also known as America's Dr. Death, has been acquitted for the 3rd time of unlawfully assisting patients in their wish to die. Dr. Kevorkian said he's determined to pursue his campaign for clear professional guidelines in this controversial area of medical ethics.
Dr. Jack Kevorkian has admitted attending 28 suicides in the past 6 years, helping those terminally ill and in great pain. But every time the state of Michigan has prosecuted him, they've failed.
Members of the jury find the defendant not guilty.
Dr. Kevorkian claimed he's being persecuted in a judicial lynching, not prosecuted. This was his 3rd acquittal, and he exploded under cross-examination.
There's no law here. Tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
Prove it.
The charges involved the 1991 assisted suicides of Marjorie Wantz, who had severe pelvic pain, and Sherry Miller, who had multiple sclerosis.
What is it you want? Put it in plain English.
I want to die.
After the verdict, Dr. Kevorkian asked the American Medical Association, not the courts, to set down guidelines for medically assisted suicide.
It may be a sin to you. It may not be a sin to others. But one thing is sure, to any rational human being in an enlightened society, this could never be a crime.
Dr. Kevorkian has been a major catalyst in changing American attitudes to assisted suicide. If his legal battles are indeed over, the ethical battle will now be renewed to encourage other doctors to offer what he calls a legitimate medical service. Gavin Esler, BBC News, Washington.
Here, Labour is now expected to win a Commons vote this week on European agriculture policy, but only because Conservative MPs have been told they don't need to take part in tomorrow's debate. Europe's common agricultural policy accounts for nearly half of the EU's annual budget. Our economics correspondent Evan Davis examines this controversial system of subsidies.
From the viewpoint of most farmers, the common agricultural policy makes sense. In Hertfordshire, for example, Bob Fiderman applies nitrogen fertiliser to the wheat crop on his 1,200-acre farm, confident of a regular income in what was traditionally an unpredictable business. For him, the CAP means he receives an annual cheque just for being a farmer.
The payments that I actually got through CAP was effectively my profit. For an average sort of person, we would be looking at 30,000 plus. But obviously I'm a bigger farmer than most, so it's a bit more than that.
It all started with the Treaty of Rome founding the European Economic Community. The new European authorities were to launch a plan. In bumper years they'd buy and hoard crops and restrict imports coming in. In lean years they'd sell crops and obstruct exports. In practice though, governments bought more food than they sold. They used their plan to help small farmers, viewed as the custodians of the countryside. As a result, there were no lean years, and governments could barely store the mountains of food accumulated. But today, the economics of European farming have changed. The surpluses of grain, for example, that would have filled this and other government stores have all but disappeared. The CAP is evolving under a package of reforms agreed 4 years ago that cut the rewards to farmers for overproducing. Empty warehouses, but the CAP has fresh ironies. It's Europe's only industry where people are paid not to produce and are discouraged from exporting. All that just when the rest of the world is short of grain and actually wants to buy ours. And the burden of the CAP is still enormous. In 1994, for example, with the latest reliable figures, the total budget of the European Union was about £50 billion. Of that, half went on farmers. But the true cost is greater, in high food prices. In total, support is equivalent to about £12,000 to every farmer in Europe. For consumers, the cost amounts to the equivalent of £250 a year for each of us. It's a subsidy that not all farmers think is healthy. Linda Whetstone, for example, uses some of her land for things like training horses, a rural activity that gets no subsidy. In her view, other farmers would do well to follow her lead.
they've joined any other person who gets a cheque from the government every week, and they become dependent upon it. I think they're making a big mistake, because I think that they're altering their life's direction because of this dependency on government payout. And when it actually vanishes, which it will, like the Berlin Wall, they are going to suffer for it.
Most farmers disagree. They're scared of the forces that would be unleashed if the CAP were to go, the competition that would occur if fewer farmers were viable. They're hoping Europe's politicians will continue to share their fears. Evan Davis, BBC News.
Rugby Union and Neath are the Heineken League champions. They beat Pontypridd tonight to finish level on points with Cardiff, who also won. But Neath secured the title by scoring 2 more tries during the season. On the day the French President Jacques Chirac is visiting London, one of the capital's most famous sights is being exported to Paris. A British businessman is hoping that the London taxi, or Le Cab, will soon be a familiar sight in the French capital.
In Paris, you can have any colour you like as long as it isn't black. When Jacques Chirac was the city's mayor, he was keen to license London cabs to use the streets of the French capital, but only if they were painted in livelier colours. It's taken time, but now the businessman behind the venture hopes to import 1,500 left-hand drive taxis before the end of the century in green, maroon, blue and white. The eye-catching shape, though, hasn't been altered, and the company's sales pitch to the French is that this is a British classic which can become a winner in France and beyond.
The rest of the world, they don't have this vehicle. So you can imagine the professional driver in France at the moment has been waiting for a long time to possess a vehicle which can do the job properly.
Paris, though, is a tough market. Its taxi drivers hard to please. This man was worried that partitions in London taxis would make it harder for him to share his opinions with passengers, while others simply feared the new vehicles would be too expensive. The enduring outline of the London cab, though, will be a selling point. Subtle modifications haven't changed the basic shape in more than 30 years, and the French like their imports from Britain to have a touch of the traditional about them. More practically, Le Cab, as it's already known, has been given a licence because it can accommodate a wheelchair in the back, and because its tight turning circle makes it perfect, in theory at least, for the narrow streets of Paris. Kevin Connolly, BBC News.
Just. The main news tonight, the Home Secretary has ordered an inquiry into as many as a dozen terrorist bombing convictions after equipment used for testing for explosives was found to be contaminated. Newsnight on BBC Two at 10:30 will be talking live to Michael Howard about the issue. But that's all from the 9 o'clock news. Good night.